Hey, Baby God family, thanks for tuning in today. Before starting today's conversation, just a quick disclaimer. We're going to be getting into topics related to childhood sexual abuse and other kinds of trauma. So just know that it's a viewer and listener discretion advised kind of episode today. I'm really excited to welcome today's guest. She's someone I wanted to have on for quite some time. Her name is Vesper Stamper, and I can't wait for all of you to get to know her. So let's get right to it. Vesper Stamper, welcome. You are an author, an illustrator of a handful of books, a couple of which I've actually read, and not just to prepare for this interview. I stumbled across your work with my daughter, who was a preteen reader at the time, and we came across What the Night Sings, which we'll talk more about in addition to the other things that you've written. But just tell us about yourself first, Vesper. You've got an amazing story, and just kind of where you come from and how you were brought up.
Yeah. So I'm an author illustrator, as you said. Somebody said I should write some books. I don't know why, but that's what I do now. We'll get into that later. But yeah, so I was born in Germany on a U.S. Army base, raised in New York City, very much a person who fits everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Kind of span a lot of different spheres in that way. Yeah, I was raised in a family of artists and really wonderful grandparents, raised by my grandparents primarily. But my nuclear family, let's say, had a lot of trouble in it. I'm not sure how deeply you want to go into that, but
Oh,
yeah, as you said, I did experience some very capital T childhood trauma, as did most of the people in my family, most of the women especially. But through a combination of my really wonderful grandparents and books, I managed to come out of that not unscathed, but equipped, I would say.
did the, and you can share or not share, I don't want to pry too much, but did the abuse happen overseas? Well, you said you were born in Germany. I know from your story that it was Nuremberg, actually, right? I mean, that's a
Yeah, yeah.
notable city. Where were you when the abuse happened?
In New York.
Okay.
So it was a relative in my extended family. So I never met my father, my biological father. He was in the army, which was why I was born on the army base, or in an army hospital, I should
Yeah.
say. And so when I was 4, my mom remarried my Jewish stepfather, and I was raised Jewish with him. My mom was a convert to Judaism,
Okay.
and they were married for about 10 years. And then, unfortunately, they divorced, and so he was, you know, in my life for a fairly short time. But it was a really impactful time in terms of growing up in a Jewish environment that really impacted me
Yeah.
in ways that I didn't really comprehend for many years after
Yeah.
what had been kind of instilled in me.
Sure.
Yeah.
And where did your grandparents live?
In Staten Island, New York.
Wow.
Yeah. So I lived a great deal of my childhood at their house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were they Jewish?
No, they were Episcopalian.
Okay.
And yeah, so they used to take me to church, and I would sit in the front pew right by the choir so I could be close to my grandparents. And it was a really rich environment sensorily. So it was a small stick Gothic church, wooden, but really beautifully ornate carving inside. And which my grandfather had a large part in helping to restore the church, from the 1880s, I believe.
Yeah.
St. Albans Church in Staten Island. And so, I kind of grew up with this really interesting mix of, yeah, this really talented, detail-oriented grandfather in this kind of working class environment, but with all this beauty, you know?
Yeah.
So it was really wonderful in that way.
Right. I know the abuse was, I mean, a massive event in your life and in your family's life because your abuse coming to light shed light on other people in your family.
Yes.
It sort of all surfaced through your trauma coming to the surface. Is there any more detail you can help us with there? Like, it was someone in your own family that
Right.
was perpetrating this against you and other women in your family. Is that how I remember this?
Yeah, so it was a great uncle, and I'll put it this way: he made his way through every female in my family, and unfortunately, the generation that this happened in, my mom was a teenager when she had me, so she, my aunts were, younger. I was sort of like the sixth child coming along in a way, and so it was. It was at dinner one night when we were all sitting around the table, and the great uncle was over, and I was 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old, and I said something like, "Oh, do you remember when you did blah blah blah?" And it was like record scratch moment, and everybody realized that this had been going on, and nobody had been talking to each other about it. And so my understanding is that when I said that very, innocently at the dinner table, that the abuse stopped for everybody. That's my understanding.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that it was a matter of just it had been spoken, or do you think
Yeah.
were all the victims isolated from each other until you spoke up?
That's a good question. I don't really know, but I think that, as I said, it was a generation in which those things were not spoken of.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they were brought up, they were downplayed. In fact, my grandparents, who were really wonderful people, saintly, in fact, when it was brought to light for them, they said things like, "Well, but he helped us build our house, and he's been very helpful to us." You know?
Gosh,
Yeah. And
that's
so it's it's inconceivable to me that as a parent who has been very protective of my children, and yet I'm not a helicopter parent by any means. I was a latchkey kid. I'm not hovering in that way,
right.
But in that one area, I was very protective of my kids and taught them how to properly understand their bodies and their right to their own bodies, their relationship to their bodies, the goodness of their bodies. And so, keeping the lines of communication open in our family, our immediate family, as I was raising them, enabled it to not happen to them.
In what ways do you think you were shaped by that experience, the abuse itself? Like, how did you have to heal?
I was the kind of kid who, in Waldorf education, we talk about the dream of childhood and not waking the child up from the dream, right? It's about when a kid turns 7 that they start to emerge from all of the dream, let's say, the fantasy, the imaginative play, and the blurring of the lines between reality and fantasy that happens between birth and 7, right? And so because I had the grandparents that I did, and because I had so much art in my life, I think, music, books, I think I was able to segment a large part of my mind to still remain in that dream. I still haven't fully woken up from it, in fact. And so I think it gave me a place to go. Maybe you could say to compartmentalize, if you wanted
Yeah.
to think about it that way. I was able to compartmentalize the difficulty in my childhood from the things that were very beautiful, including the things that I was making myself. And I'm not saying the drawings were beautiful when I was making
Yeah.
them, but in terms of the engagement, like the beautiful engagement that I was able to have,
Yeah.
it was a real lifesaver for me.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about art as a gift from God in the sense that he gives it to people who need to cope with their pain as a way of coping?
I think he gives it to everybody. I don't think that
Let me explain.
there's anybody that, yeah.
Yeah, I just think anytime I run into somebody who's like super gifted artistically and they're expressive in that art, or someone who's really funny, even like someone who's a gifted orator, and storyteller. It seems to be there's always some deep story there of pain.
Yes, that's true. Mm-hmm.
And it's their cultivation of that art has been a way of dealing with their pain and working through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that for some people it can be an escape. And if it only remains in the realm of escape, then it can become a trap. You know, I think it can feed the ego to a really dangerous point, especially for very wounded people. When you have something that you're gifted at that feeds your ego, then you can never get out of this kind of cycle of like pain and ego.
Yeah.
There's nothing to kind of trip you out of that and push you into something that's like truly redemptive. And I don't mean that the subject matter of your art has to be redemptive or anything like that. Necessarily.
Sure,
It's
sure.
more just, that process.
Yeah. When you were a child, let's say after, from 3 onward to adolescence, were you did you identify as Jewish or Christian or both or neither? How did God play into this?
So I think at that age, I didn't really have like a concept consciously of God. I would have said I had a consciousness of something, that I was part of something bigger, and that that I saw things that other people didn't see. For sure, I would have said that. I think I understood that there was such a thing as religion and that I was part of a few of them in a way. So, I had my Jewish upbringing in my nuclear family, and then I had my grandparents' church that was very much identified with them,
Yeah.
not so much with God necessarily, although I did feel a sense of transcendence there. But then when I was in high school, I got involved with Wicca and transcendental meditation and, the occult broadly, the New Age and occult broadly, and also the Hare Krishna movement. So that was sort of my, religious, my syncretism, of my early teenage years.
Yeah.
That's
What kind of high
probably-
school did you go to? Well, because it's pretty deep thinking, it sounds like. I don't remember being indoctrinated.
I did go to a pretty exceptional high school. I went to LaGuardia High School in Manhattan.
Okay.
So it's the High School of Performing Arts that the movie and series Fame is based on.
Of course.
So that is where I went. It was a fantastic experience. All of the misfits and weirdos and, outliers from all the 5 boroughs of New York just kind of coming together and in
Yeah.
this nice little safe environment where we could just be our freakish selves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good.
Did you not see any conflict at the time in terms of, bringing together, integrating your Jewish heritage with your experience with the Episcopalians into occult and Wicca and all of that? And was that not a problem for you at the time?
Not at the time. And so, in fact, I still maintain that my Jewish identity and my Christian identity are one and the same.
Yeah.
They're, in my estimation, those are part and parcel of the same thing.
Okay.
However, when I was introduced to Wicca, it was specifically through this book that talked about how you could be a Christian and practice Wicca. Like it was fine. It was like God is love and blah blah blah, and it's all the same, and all religions lead to the same place, and so
Yeah.
you're just kind of expanding your spiritual horizons and things like that. And so, yeah, I was basically, lied to in that way and
Yeah.
bought it completely because I was a very open person. Like, despite what had happened to me in my childhood and what was continuing to happen in my home, the abuse was one thing, but my mother has mental illness. And so that was the much more like chronic, if you could say. The abuse was more acute, and the situation with my mom was much more chronic. That was really like the backdrop of all of that, and so I coped with that by not covering it up. I coped with it by being the most open person I could possibly be and Probably too open. Like, I would tell people my life is an open book. I have nothing to hide, because the reality at home was being screwed with so much all the time
Yeah.
that like I had to fight for my reality, you know, and my reality like it had to be mine. I had to own the facts of what I was seeing in
Huh.
front of me and not let it be like dictated to me from elsewhere. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
it does.
So,
Is
yeah.
that what
So
appealed
that's how I
to
coped with that.
you? I mean, about Wicca and Hare Krishna and whatever else you got involved in at that point in time. Was it the, I don't want to say the control factor, but like you're in the driver's seat in a way? Is that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with Wicca, especially with any of the occult stuff, it very, very much was a control thing. Like somebody told me that I could, through certain spells and incantations, I could control the weather or that I could control how other people felt about me. And
Mm.
I mean, that was very, are you kidding me? For a 13-year-old who's like going
Oh
through
yeah.
abuse at home, like
It's intoxicating.
it's very appealing,
Yeah.
but
Could
at the
you
same
do those
time,
things?
oh, who knows? I mean, I believe I could have. I believe that there was probably something going on there. I do believe in demons for sure. I had a strong encounter with one of them. Um, yeah, I completely believe in that.
Mm-hmm.
But how much I was able to do, you know, I think that part is probably, I don't know. I'll stay a little ambivalent on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably wise.
Yeah, but I think what I do want to say about that, about the openness, is that at the same time that there was this sense of control, there was also this acknowledgement in all of those systems that yes, indeed, I am part of something bigger than what I can see with my own eyes, and I do see things that other people don't see.
Hmm.
So that was the common factor, and it sort of allowed me to live in this that openness, but also that sense of control.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you think there was anything about having gone through what you did, both the acute and the more drawn out trauma of your mother's mental illness, and living with that at home, that opened you up to those sorts of influences and experiences in terms of Wicca and Hare Krishna, et cetera?
There might have been there might have been a little bit of a sense of belonging and looking for community in that.
Hmm.
However, it was pre-internet, so there wasn't a way to find other people really. It was really just, I mean, in terms of the Wicca, it was me and my friend,
Yeah.
reading books and screwing around and like, lighting candles and things like that.
Right. Right.
It didn't go, in terms of the community aspect of it, it didn't go as deep as it could have.
Yeah.
Whereas today, I think it would be much easier to get trapped into doing some really dark things.
Hmm.
With the Hare Krishna part, though, that was very community oriented. Like I met them. I mean, I got involved through a friend, but I also had met them through, people on the street in New York,
Yeah.
went to a vegetarian feast, it was a lot of dancing and it seemed like a very kind of like happy, kind of hippie environment,
Uh huh.
and a lot of dancing and eating.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Vegetarian feast sounds oxymoronic to me, but I'm Texan, so
Oh, but
I
it's
know.
Indian food, dude.
Okay. Well, that I can deal with. I love Indian food.
You know? It's good.
Uh, so I'm a food bigot. That's what you need to know about me. So yeah, man, what a story, Vesper. And we're only into your teenage years at this point. I've heard you speak about getting a little deeper into the New Age and occult stuff, and your being drawn to astral projection in particular. Is there
Yeah.
anything you could tell us about that experience and sort of what that did to you and
Yeah.
when you were still a teenager?
So the astral projection was actually the most appealing part of all of this for me, and I think it was because of this sense that yeah, I could see things that people didn't see. I could perceive things that other people didn't see.
Yeah,
I was a really strong dreamer.
like
And so I
literally,
thought,
like
oh
a
my
dreamer,
gosh,
like
yeah,
yeah.
like not lucid dreams, but really like powerful,
Mm,
powerful dreams,
yeah.
that I felt like, were showing me things that I knew were there.
Yeah.
And I still dream that way. So the astral projection kind of offered me a chance to, as it was advertised, okay, offered me the chance to tangibly see those things that I perceived, right? And so
Can we just
I would
define
come,
astral projection real quick for
right.
people?
So it's the belief that you can separate your soul or your spiritual body from your physical body,
Yeah.
and to sort of like be unencumbered by your physical body so that you could fly around and translocate and all of these things.
Yeah.
Go in and out of dimensions, go to different galaxies if you wanted to, just in general, being unhindered by your physical body.
Right.
And since my physical body was a source of pain for me, both from the trauma and from, I've had chronic illness since I was, you know, 13 or 15 that I still deal with today. I mean, how aware of that was I at the time, like how conscious of that connection, but it felt like very appealing to me.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to do this. So I would go home after school every day and I would read this book about astral projection and I would try to practice it, and try to really do the steps, to be able to do this thing. And so one day I came home from school, I got my book out, I laid down, and at this point I was about 15 years old. I was living on my own. My mom and I technically shared an apartment, a studio apartment, but she was never home. She lived with somebody else. And so I was alone all the time. Came home from school, laid down, was getting ready to do this. And for the first time, I actually did feel like I was separating from my body. I could see through my closed eyelids, could see the room around me. And I started to feel like I was raising up about a couple of inches outside of my body. And I was like, oh, it's working, it's working. And all of a sudden, the phone rang. And I felt myself slam back into my body, but like off, I didn't quite feel like I went back in correctly.
Yeah.
Right. A little ajar.
Yeah.
And so it turned out the phone call, it was my boyfriend at the time. And I picked up the phone and I immediately started shaking. And so I realized I couldn't talk to him. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to call you back, And so I'm like trembling, shaking uncontrollably. And I looked down at my hands and they had turned black.
Oh my gosh.
And so I, kind of like settled myself out of it. Somehow I came out of it, stopped shaking. But from that very day, I started having these uncontrollable thoughts. And they were disgusting, really like horrible, horrible thoughts all the time. And it really felt like something else was thinking my thoughts for me. These weren't things that I thought or believed. They were just horrible. And I couldn't escape
Violent.
them. Violent, perverted, racist, like all of the things that I'm not, And it was from that day on. One day I didn't have those things, the next day I did, and they persisted for a couple of years. And so fast forward, I had become a Christian. That's another long story, which we'll maybe get
Yeah.
to later.
I do. Yeah. I wanna get-
But it was like a year after I'd become a Christian. So at this point I was about 17 and I was at a retreat and I stayed behind after the speaker and I was just kind of praying alone in the sanctuary. And the same guy who led me to the Lord came over and just, to check on me, say how I was doing and, oh, how can I pray for you? And I said, oh, well, I was staying behind to pray about something else, but really what I'm dealing with is I have these uncontrollable thoughts. And I told him, I didn't connect it necessarily to the astral projection, but I was like, I don't know why I can't like get rid of this. And he said, well, by any chance, have you ever been involved in witchcraft? And I was like, what? How did you know? So he said, why don't you just let me pray for you? And he didn't counsel me out of it or anything like that, but he started to pray. And all of a sudden I felt a physical manifestation of this being coming, like trying to tear itself out of me.
My gosh.
I felt like I was going to vomit. It was really violent. It was really physically violent. It felt inwardly. I wasn't getting violent, but it felt violent.
Yeah.
It felt like it was tearing me apart. And I started screaming, "Get out of me!" And so my friend was praying for me, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, it was gone, completely gone. And so were the thoughts. I never battled with them again. They were gone. And so what I think happened is that when I kind of slammed back into my body at that point during that astral projection session, which I never did again, by the way, it freaked me out so badly. I think that something slipped in while I was out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
I think a being kind of slipped into a space between my soul and my body, if you wanted to put it that way, and was sort of inhabiting me.
Like a demonic being, you mean?
A demonic being, yeah. And I've never experienced it since, and it's been 30 years.
Wow. Did that pastor
Yeah.
call the being out? Like, was it
I don't remember. I was not at all conscious of what he was doing.
really? Okay.
Not at all. I went somewhere else for sure.
But you knew something because you started screaming, "Get out of me." You felt what was happening.
Right, but I at that point I was not in control of my faculties.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And it hasn't happened since, the thoughts and
Nope.
things, which tells you whatever was in you at the time was,
Is
in
gone.
fact, thinking those thoughts for you,
Yes, yes.
projecting them
Very
onto
much
you.
influencing me, whispering them in my ear, all of that kind of thing. But
Wow.
yeah, but it no longer had a place to be. And so it had to leave.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, man, there's a lot of
Yeah.
people that I've known that have expressed and heard foreign, unknown things and nefarious things, voices or ideas, pictures, projections, whatever, that they could not explain. And, usually people seek out mental health solutions to numb
Yes.
or silence that sort of thing. And I'm not,
That's important.
yeah, I'm not taking away from that at all. I just think sometimes we in the church do emphasize that at the expense of spiritual treatment.
Yes. Yeah, and so I think believe me, growing up with a mentally ill parent, I firmly believe in mental health, all of that, and
Yeah.
seeking out help. I don't battle with mental illness, thank God. That was not what was going on here. I know some people have heard my story and said, "Oh, that's OCD or whatever," and I don't have OCD. It was, how like I had this manifestation for a year or two, and after one event, it was gone.
Yeah.
After one event, it came in, and after one event, it was gone.
Fascinating.
And yeah, and it didn't take medication or counseling to get out. It took deliverance. So I think this is what the Catholic Church and what the Orthodox Church do really well is they do have a tradition of exorcism
Yeah.
that is strong, and it's practiced, it's methodical, it's not emotional. It just is, and it works. And
It's also
so, yeah.
holistic in my experience
Yeah.
with it. We outsource a lot of our exorcisms to the to the Catholic Church locally. I
You
laugh.
have a
I
lot of
should not
exorcisms.
laugh
Interesting.
because it's a
No,
very
no.
serious matter. If you're listening or
It
watching
is.
right now, what I'm laughing at is the fact that we outsource it to the Catholics. Not that it is a funny thing, but we do that because they're very historically responsible. The
Yeah.
exorcism department in the Catholic Church is as solid as
Yeah.
I have found anywhere else, and other
Yeah.
other groups of Christians do deliverance things, and Pentecostals and Charismatics, and they are very serious about that. But I have just found I don't know, more success, I guess, more care in the process. They require every person who's afflicted to go through pretty intense psychological evaluation first.
Yeah.
And because,
Yes.
they don't need to be needed by these folks who are struggling, but they're there if they are in fact needed. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you do have to, and thank God, we understand in the modern world that you can make distinctions between all these things.
Yeah.
And there's best practices. So.
For sure. Okay, so you sort of alluded to this earlier, but at some point in your teenage years, you fell in love with Jesus. Like,
You hijacked me.
if you ever needed proof of the power of Christ, like here we have a teenager who is dabbling in New Age and Wiccan sort of practice at I would presume, a pretty secular arts high school.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in New York City, having been raised in, or born
Public
at
school.
least, yeah, and born in Germany, and all these reasons why you shouldn't be a professing Christian today, and yet Jesus wrapped his arms around you. How'd that happen?
Well, I started going to this youth group. I was friends with a bunch of people in this in a Catholic community theater group, and they happened to be Protestants who just loved to act in community theater. And so they would always invite me to this youth group, and I was like, I'm not going to your Christian youth group. I'm sorry, it's not a thing that's happening. And so for a couple of years, they would just gently say, "Oh, but it's fun. You should come. It's really fun. We do things. We play games. We whatever." And when I was 15, I started playing guitar. And so they were like, "But you could come and bring your guitar." Okay, fine. I'll come and bring my guitar. So, I would go on Friday nights, and it was fun. And it wasn't like a happy clappy kind of I was a serious person. I was not I've never been a sort of circus clown type of person. Okay? I've always been fairly serious. And so I finally agreed to go, and man, the leadership there was really incredible. They were respectful of us. They never talked down to us. They didn't assume they had the corner on, just because they were adults, that they had the corner on
Knowledge and truth.
knowledge and truth, or seriousness about the Lord or anything like that. And so I just, I respected them a lot because they respected me. And so what I didn't know is that for 2 years, these same friends they had a prayer group on Tuesday nights that would go out on the Bayonne Bridge, and they would pray for the toughest cases. And they basically took me on as a prayer project. And so they would go out there on the Bayonne Bridge on Tuesday nights, and they would pray for me for 2 years.
At
And
what point did they
didn't know
tell
this.
you this? Yeah.
A couple of years after I became a Christian.
Okay, good.
Yeah. No, they didn't know. They never told me. And they prayed for me because I was the toughest case. They were like, if she comes to the Lord, we'll know there's a God.
What at that point? What did they know about you that put you in that category?
Oh, all of this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, I was a very open person.
Yeah.
Totally open about everything I did. Too much so. It's TMI.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, I was at a friend's house, a guy friend, and on a Friday after school, and he started trying to seduce me, basically. Tried to talk me into having sex with him, and he was pretty bad at it. And I was not interested at all. And so nothing happened, but I knew I needed to get out of that basement.
Yeah.
So I went upstairs and I asked his mom to drive me to youth group, because very conveniently, oh, it's Friday night.
Look at the
I have
time.
youth group.
Yeah.
Look at the time. So she drove me over there, and youth group was already going on. And I felt such, like, I don't know if it was shame. It was just darkness about this thing that had just happened, this conversation I just had, because I didn't know what was going on with me, with my body, with my sexual orientation, my desire, any of that stuff. I had no tether to that. It was all very confusing to me. And so it really sent me into a tailspin. And I realized, gosh, I have no reason for anything that I do in life. Like, it's just empty. It's just total emptiness. And so the way the building was set up was that the youth group was in the basement and the sanctuary was on the second floor, and there was this vestibule with a staircase in between. And I could not bring myself to go downstairs to the youth group. I was so dark, and I had this vision. As I was sitting there crying, I had this vision of looking over this abyss into just nothingness. It was like pure nihilism. And so this youth group leader, who's the same gentleman I told you about before, he came up and saw me there, and he just sat with me, and he let me cry. He didn't ask me what was going on. He just sat with me, very gentle. And he said, you know what? They're going to be coming upstairs in a minute. Do you want to go in the sanctuary? So, like you have some, you don't have to explain yourself or whatever. And so we went in the sanctuary, and he just sat with me again. He didn't say anything. He didn't put his arm around me. He didn't try to comfort me in any way. He just sat with me. And then after a while, as I'm just bawling my eyes out, he just said to me, do you want Jesus? And it had never occurred to me before to want him or not.
Yeah.
I barely even knew who he was. And all of a sudden, it was like this, everything just like rushed together, this like rushing wind, I don't know, of like my being or whatever, and like came together, and out of my mouth came yes. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know what I was signing up for. He didn't, read me the 4 spiritual laws or anything. It was just, I knew that I knew that I knew that I knew that I wanted him.
What do you
It
think
was
you
like,
knew exactly? Like a critic would say,
I
well,
don't
you were
know.
emotionally vulnerable and, you would have said yes to anything at that point. But I know you,
No,
yeah.
no, no, no. No, I wouldn't have said yes to anything because I, 2 hours before that or an hour before
You were
that, I was
saying no.
offered sex and I was saying no.
Good point.
I never thought about that till just now, but it was like, yeah, I could have had the one or the other, and I chose the other.
I think you chose the right man.
I think I chose the right one. So, so at that moment, at the moment that I said yes, I had another vision. And when I say that I had a vision, I really mean it. Like, I'm not just saying I had an imaginative moment. Yeah. Like, I was transported to somewhere else. So just like I had this vision of the abyss, at that moment of saying yes, I had this vision of being in front of the cross, and all I saw were Jesus's feet so it was like from here, And in this vision, I was crumpling up pieces of paper and violently throwing them at him, violently throwing them at the foot of the cross, crumpling up, hurling, all this, until this pile of crumpled up paper would build and build and build. And as soon as it would touch his toe, the whole pile disappeared. And then I did it again. It was just like all my rage and all of the pain and all of the trauma and all of the abuse and everything. It was just all hurling it at him. And then as soon as it touched his toe, gone again. Right. And so anyway, this guy said a prayer I don't remember what the prayer was. He asked if I had a Bible at home. I said no. He gave me a Bible from the pew. What did I know? I went downstairs, splashed my face. I went downstairs. I joined the youth group. We had a fun night, whatever. And the next day, I went home with this Bible, and I read the Bible all night.
Wow.
And I just was like, who is this? And why have I not known about this before?
Yeah.
And I proceeded over that night, I think, to fall in love. And the next day, I saw my friends again. We were going to a theme park, and I said, yeah, I think I got saved last night. I don't know. Is that what you call it? Like, I don't know.
These your Christian
heard you
friends?
say that before. What?
Your Christian friends?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And they were like, what? These same people who had been praying for me unbeknownst to me,
Wow.
And so, that was 30 years ago this year, and I've never looked back.
So touching.
I've never been the same.
So moving, honestly. And the way you articulate it is so important. Sometimes Christians talk in very stale terms about what God means to us, what Jesus is for us. And I don't know, I read somewhere, I don't remember where I got this or where I came across this, but it stuck with me that Christians today often have Christian sacred morality and secular imagination. And that's a plague upon the church right now, at least in the West, is that we don't think imaginatively or in terms of visions and images. I think about your image or your vision of the cross, the foot of the cross, and the fact that you're throwing wads of paper at the foot of the cross might not sound significant to the average listener, but you're a writer and an artist. And that, to me, I don't know if this is how you interpreted it, but those are all your feelings and thoughts and pain and all of it. You're crumpling up at the feet of Jesus, and when it touches his feet, it goes away
Yeah.
and it's resolved. Is that how you interpreted that?
So I didn't have an interpretation of that vision for many years afterward.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it meant. And that's what confirms to me that it was a legitimate vision, because I had no idea what it meant at the time.
Yeah. It's like,
So,
why paper and not rocks, or something else? I don't know.
yeah, sure. And why were they blank pieces of paper? And I don't know.
Yeah.
So it was, I think now, yeah, you're exactly right about, I think, what it meant. But for a long time, all I knew, and really all I still know, to be honest with you, really all I know is that I met this man. I can't, in fact, in the darkest times where, in those 30 years, it's not like everything got perfect by any means.
Sure.
No, believe me. The pain didn't stop. The suffering didn't stop. There's a lot of ways in which reached new levels. But I know that I met him. And there were times where I was tempted to walk away. And I would hear him say to me, yeah, but you met me. You know me.
You know me.
You know me. You're
What
not going to leave.
what is it,
And I
and
would say, yeah, you're right.
what was it about his person, about his character, that you fell in love with initially? Do you remember?
I don't know if it's necessarily qualities as much as it is just him. I can't escape him. I can't escape him. He's so present.
How is Jesus different from the other men that you had known to that point in your life, at least?
He's never hurt me. He's never, I was going to say he's never demanded anything of me, but that's not true. He's demanded everything of me.
Yeah.
But he's never taken anything by force. He's never taken anything by force,
Right.
that's for sure. Yeah. He's always, always been so gentle, way more gentle than I am with myself, way more gentle than anybody else is with me or than I am with other people. I don't know if you can tell, I'm sort of a tough bird. I'm not everybody's favorite flavor. I can be fairly intense.
Yeah.
But he's never condemned me for that. He's always invited me to just give more of myself to him, and invited me into more and more life, more and more beauty, more and more joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, he's never hit me like a wall just now. Wow. Thank God.
Yeah.
Vesper, thanks for sharing that part of the story
Yeah.
with us. It's so beautiful to hear the different ways Jesus reaches us exactly where we are.
Can I say a little bit more about that?
Please.
So, you're actually catching me at I want to say tail end. I hope it's the tail end of a couple of months of really deep sorrow. And mainly the backdrop, or a big part of this, not even the backdrop, it's a big part of it, is the attacks on
course.
October 7th.
Yes.
And as somebody raised Jewish, as somebody who writes about the Holocaust, I study this deep. This is like my beat.
Right.
It's my beat.
Yeah.
I understand why the Holocaust happened, how it happened. I understand it, and it's not just the Holocaust. It's
Yeah.
like it's this cyclical hatred, and then it's the. So, was I surprised by the attacks on October 7th? No, not at all. And yet, what really, really hurt afterwards was the gaslighting, the minimization, the glee, the protests. It's all been really dark, really dark.
Right.
Concurrent with that, there were some things that happened in my personal life. I got a health diagnosis. It's been rocky. Okay. And I'm not somebody who struggles with depression. I thank God, and I have compassion on people who do, but I was very depressed. And I was kind of scaring myself a little bit in terms of where my mind was going. And all I could do was cry out to the Lord, and say the Jesus prayer and just, Lord, help me. Like, just, you know, I have nobody but you. You're the only answer, And, when you write about the Holocaust, if you really deeply research it in the way that any of us who've worked in this subject matter know, it changes you. And there's a part of you that dies. There is a part of you that dies. Your hope in humanity dies a little bit, you know, and I think it needs to,
Yeah.
you know? And so one of the things that the Lord showed me when I was doing this work is he gave me access to his sorrow. Now, I thought known sorrow before, and I had, but this took me to a new level of sorrow, but it was his sorrow. And that's different. There's human sorrow that is despair, and it's nothing but darkness. It is that abyss,
Yeah.
right? But then there's his sorrow on the cross, which brings life, right? Like if a seed falls to the ground and dies, it emerges as new life, right? And so what he gave me was access to his heart and access to the wound in his side. And so that's where I live. I live there. I live in that wound in his side. I live in the reality of his suffering and in the fellowship of his suffering. And I'm not trying to make more of that than it is. I'm just saying he gave me access to that.
Yeah.
Okay. But that wound is the closest place to his heart. So it's the safest place to be. It's the best place to be. It's the most loving place to be, is in his wound. And so when all this stuff happened with October 7th, I had to go there. And I've been crying out to him ever since. Okay, if I have to do 40 more years of this and it's despair, I'm not going to make it. Like, I won't make it if it's just the darkness. But if you can somehow give me joy in this, then I'll do it. I'll go as far into your sorrow as you need me to go, as long as you give me joy. Because, and I'm just telling you how, like, I've been processing this in the last
Yeah.
24 hours,
Let's go.
actually. Okay. So if I'm just suffering, like, I got this health diagnosis, it's a lifelong condition. It's, hopefully it's not going to shorten my life. But it's something I'm going to have to live with. If it's just, there's the aspect of it where it's like Paul's thorn, you know? So when Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh, he talks about it right on the heels of, like, he's been given this revelation. Like, it's right after he talks about going to the third
Right.
heaven and all of this stuff. Like, I've been given all these revelations. And then he says, and then I was given this thorn in the flesh in order for the Lord to say, my grace is sufficient for you,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
Right. So, like, people who have been given the the gift of vision or art or, whatever it is, it's like there can also be that thorn. It's like you said, with comedians or whatever, like, there's often this aspect of suffering.
Right.
Right. And so as I've been processing this, I've been thinking, I don't want it to just be for my own sanctification. Like, I get that part of it. That's fine. But I don't want other people to look at me and feel bad for me because of the things I go through. I hate that.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to say, oh, honey, you never get a break. Like, I have friends like that who say,
Sure.
oh, why don't you ever get a break? The things are always happening to you. And I'm like, yeah, but doesn't it happen to everybody? Like, everybody's got their suffering, right? But what I want from the Lord is joy.
Yeah.
I want the joy that I have in him, the belonging and the love that I have for him, to be the thing that people see out of that. Because if all they see is my suffering, what good does that do for anybody? Then
Sure.
it's like
Sure.
a barrier to other people's salvation.
So, yeah.
But if they can see that there's joy in the middle of that suffering for me, then maybe they can see that there's joy in the middle of that suffering for them too.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does. But I have a question, and I don't know
Yeah.
if it's time to ask it yet. But have you found it yet? The joy in the midst of all of this pain?
Yeah.
Can you describe it?
It's the same thing it always was. It's him.
Just being with him?
Yeah.
I think you're onto something profound and ancient and forsaken in many Christian circles today. I think we are striving for a pain-free Christian journey on
Good
this
luck.
earth.
It's not going to happen. I hate to break it to you.
I know
have
you're
to tell
exactly
you.
right. Actually, it can happen, but even if it does, it's not what you think it is. It's
Well, all that is insulating yourself from the inevitable. Like, I'm sorry, we're all going to die and we're all going to lose people and we're all going to,
yeah,
nobody gets out of this
Yeah.
unscathed.
yeah. No, you're exactly
We've got a
right.
choice.
And I think embracing suffering is what you're describing it, and finding joy in that, in the wounded side of Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, that's next level. It's anti-American in some ways, anti-West, but man, we should probably get used to that instead of, because then what happens is we experience pain and we think God has forsaken us.
Oh, no.
And
How could it be? How
Right.
could that be? He went to the cross. He went to the cross. And it says, for the joy set before me, I will endure the cross, right? For the
yeah,
joy set before him, he endured the cross,
Yeah.
scorning its shame. And he sat down at the right hand of God. Like, the cross was the way to the joy.
yeah. Yeah,
That's
it
how it
seems
is.
like in the New Testament, Paul writes, we do not grieve as those who have no hope, right? That's what keeps coming to mind. Hope is seems to be the bridge to joy. The hope we have in Christ, the timeless, true, and trustworthy hope of Christ.
I'll tell you, I get this from my Jewish upbringing.
Really?
Yes, 100%. This is the Jewish story.
Yeah.
It's joy. It's choosing life. It's choosing joy in the midst of suffering. It's choosing joy when everybody's lying about you. It's choosing life. It's like we don't have another choice.
Right.
It's either that or hell. And I don't want to live in hell. I want to live.
Well, for listeners and watchers that aren't familiar with your work, I think it's important to say, like, your writing is, I guess, technically fiction, but it's nonfiction fiction. It's historical fiction. You are
Historical fiction, yeah.
extremely well researched in your writing, and the setting of your first book, or the first book I read of yours. Forgive me if there were others before that. I know you've contributed to several projects over the years as an illustrator and an author. But What the Night Sings was set in the Holocaust itself, and it was about a girl named Gerda who wasn't even sure she was Jewish, I think, if I'm remembering. Didn't even know she was Jewish until she was taken away to the camp, which is just amazing. And I think I just say all that to say to everybody getting to know you now that what you're saying about Israel and the Jewish people is not a feeling. It's not an emotional thing only for you. Like, you are extremely well researched. And if you're listening now and you want more of Vesper's insights on what's happened since October the 7th and what led to October the 7th, I found your response on Instagram to be as clear an explanation of the situation as I've heard anywhere. And I feel like I've done my fair share of homework on what's been going on. So what's your handle on Instagram? Is it
Vesper illustration. It's pretty easy.
Vesper Illustration? I encourage people to go check that out there. But sort of circling back to this conversation about Christianity and what I would call the grit of the Christian life, right? Embracing
like
pain, embracing suffering, getting our hands dirty and being okay with it. One thing that came up in our pre-interview conversations was just your desire to identify more as a mere Christian and you were part of the American Orthodox Church. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Orthodox Church in America?
Orthodox Church in America. Yeah.
As opposed to a Catholic or Protestant church here. And could you talk about sort of why you found a home in that part of Christianity versus a more typical Western evangelical Christian church expression?
Well, I'm going to just say it's not a versus. I don't I don't have the zeal of the convert, with Orthodoxy. It was very much in a way like a lateral move for us as a family. It just seemed like, oh, this is kind of what we had been seeing all along or practicing all along or kind of leaning toward all along. And oh, it actually has an expression in the church. Look at this, like the Orthodoxy. We felt like the things that made us weirdos in more Protestant circles were totally normal in the Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
The sort of like mystical
Sure.
aspect of things, but also I think the thing that we felt so relieved by when we came in, and prior to this, my husband was a pastor. We were worship leaders. There was this sense in the Divine Liturgy that nothing there was put there to cater to us or to make us feel comfortable or relevant or any of that stuff.
All those
It
catchwords.
was all of those. There was no church growth program, anything like that. There were no screens. There were no lights except candles. There was no smoke machine except the incense.
The OG smoke machine.
OG smoke machine, the best. It smells great.
But it was
But it
there
literally
before
was
you,
like-
and it'll be there after
was-
you. Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's like you walk through the doors and there's this river flowing for 2,000 years. And in fact, you could say for 2,000 years before that, because it's very similar to temple and synagogue worship,
Right.
that there's this stream that's been flowing. And on a Sunday morning, you get to step into that stream for a couple of hours. And that's what it is,
Yeah.
and it is participatory, but in a different way. But none of it is meant to, to cater to you. And it was such a relief because in previous expressions, which I don't disparage, I
Sure.
really don't disparage, they're part of our history in God. There was always that kind of stress of like, what's the pastor going to do next? What are we going to have to like co-sign to something? Like, what's his next whim going to be? Or so much of it was based on personality and charisma, and there's none of that. It's like
Yeah.
there's somebody once said, I think it was my friend Jonathan Peugeot, he said like a sermon in the Orthodox Church that's longer than 15 minutes is considered prideful.
Yikes.
And it's just meant to exposit the reading for the week, which literally every Orthodox around the world is reading at the same
Yeah,
time, So there's just this sense of participation of you don't have to make anything up.
Yeah, it's not performative, or it's not as
It's not
performative.
It's not performative in the sense that is exhausting.
Right.
But it is performative in the sense that it's very sensory and it's very participatory. Like it can't happen without the body of Christ there,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure. No, I
there's a
totally
lot.
get the appeal to it. I think there's upsides and downsides to all expressions of Christianity, right? But
Sure.
no, I definitely get the appeal, and I've seen it where churches like mine that are the opposite of what you're describing pretty much. But again, I don't disparage either any expression
Yeah.
of Christianity that's authentic and based in
Right.
truth. I see people flocking to our church for certain things,
Yep.
and some people slipping away toward expressions like you're describing. And I tend to think those folks are usually creative in their personality or mentality or
Yeah.
giftedness. They're artistic. They're reflective people, deep thinkers, people that like to, I guess, be invited into something and go deep rather than just be told what to think all the time and flash and, fog machine stuff. And it grieves me that expression of Christianity that welcomes the creatives and artists is hard to find in this culture, I guess. And I wonder what happens to Christianity over the long term when it becomes just a convert-making factory.
Yeah.
Do you think about that ever?
Well, I think about it all the time. I made a snarky comment on somebody's Instagram. I can't remember who it was. There was somebody talking about all these worship leaders and pastors who are having these moral failings and stuff. And I said, well, the first thing that you could do is tear down all the stages and put the altar back up.
Architecture speaks volumes, right?
I'm just saying, like, if you take all the art and see, I think what the Orthodox get right is that it's a matter of attention. So in the divine liturgy, your attention, and in fact, the deacon who does a lot of the service is constantly saying, wisdom, let us attend. In other words, it's constant calling back of your attention to focus on, on the liturgy and on what's happening on the altar, for example, right? So when we decided to kind of do away with all of these things that hold our attention, whether it's icons, whether it's the altar, the Eucharist, all of these things, well, our attention is not going to go automatically to the highest thing. It's going to disperse. It's going to atomize, right? And so that's why we have, now we have the worship team as the pinnacle of our attention. And it's like, well, if the worship team doesn't entertain me, or if the pastor doesn't entertain me, or titillate my mind or something like that, then I haven't or make me or then I haven't had a good worship experience. And it's like, it's not about your worship experience. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you.
Right. No, you're right. And that sounds to me like the same instinct that drives people toward things like witchcraft or New Age practices, which is make it about me. I want the power. I want to pull the strings. And man, I also think it's really unfair to pastors and worship leaders. And talk about why
nobody can bear that.
Nobody can bear that.
Nobody can bear that weight.
Yeah.
Nobody can.
Now, we do it to ourselves. I'm not saying we're unaccountable in that way, but it is it is untenable system of expectations. And I hope it's going by the wayside slowly, but it seems like those are the churches that are always getting the attention. And again, mine is pretty adjacent to that sort of model, and we're working really hard at not, I guess what we're working hard is what numbers are we counting? What do we value most? And if it's just butts and seats on Sundays, we're far from Christ.
Yeah. It is a matter of attention, right?
Yeah.
And I think in terms of the occult stuff and all of that, like, I think what people who are tempted toward New Age or artists, or people who are deconstructing their faith, and what they don't understand is that everything they're looking for is already in the church. It's already there.
Yeah.
It's just that a lot of things have been de-emphasized to the point of invisibility. And I keep thinking, I'm ecumenical Christianly,
right.
And I understand that there are certain emphases in different cultures and stuff that need to be there. So not everybody's going to become Orthodox, okay? I understand that. It's not realistic to think that. However, there are people like me who are wired a certain way and who are wired to see things and perceive things that other people don't see, that if they understood what was available to them in the Orthodox Church, for example, they might not be tempted to deconstruct. They might not feel that angst and that pain if they knew that there was a place within the church that they could go.
That's right. Man, that's a really good point.
And I'm not saying that every artist needs to become Orthodox either. I'm just saying for that certain type of person, they can find what they're looking for if it's available. Just like somebody looking for something else can find it. There's expression. We exist all over the globe where there's 3 billion of us,
Yeah.
There's a place for everybody.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think what typically happens is someone hits a wall at the church they're going to, because I think what happens is creative people and thoughtful people stir the pot, and churches often find them a threat. And so they end up, if they do have a next step in Christianity, it's usually like some Unitarian Universalist church that's not really a church. That's like whatever. So, and then they're gone. And there are pockets of Christian community like what you're describing, where folks can stay in Christ, stay among the body of Christ, and still, go the direction that He's created them to go creatively and with their questions and doubts and things.
Yeah, and the pressure's off.
Yeah.
because also that an artist steps into the church, and what's the first thing that somebody asks them? Can you design our website? Can you be on the worship team? Can you? And you're just like, I'm exhausted.
Right.
I just need to come and be restored in the Lord, and like not be dependent on to again on Sunday morning have to like tap into my resources like this. I need, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Vesper, what are you up to these days? I know you're still writing. I've heard you mention a project that you're working on now, and love to hear more about that if you can share. And then on a personal front, I know you mentioned some health struggles, but how is your family, and what's life like these days?
Life is good. I thank God have an intact family. I have children who are following the Lord. My son is a Marine. He's training special forces, which is not something I ever thought
I didn't know that. That's wow.
No, my husband and I were both artists, like never thought we would raise a Marine, especially that kind of Marine. But he is that kind of Marine. He's really crushing it. And thank God,
Wow.
I see the world completely differently now that I have a son in the military. I no longer have the luxury to be a pacifist that I am naturally. But no, everybody's good. And yeah, my health struggles are what they are. I've had them for 30 years. And this new diagnosis is not fun, but hey, it's all right.
Yeah.
The Lord's with me in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're writing on this.
I am writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually quit writing last year because the experience of writing my last book took so much out of me that I thought, I don't have to do this to myself anymore.
Yeah.
And then a story came, and then I didn't, when the story comes, you got to go with it. It takes over.
Yeah.
And so I'm working on the third book in this Germany series. So I have What the Night Sings, which is about the post-Holocaust period. Berliners, which is it's 15 years later, and it's about the Berlin Wall going up. And the next one I'm working on is about the Berlin Wall coming down.
Yeah.
And all three of them have to do, I don't intend to do this, but it's just what I know. It's all about artists and making their way in these difficult times. So yeah, I'm excited about it.
Yes, it's fascinating, your work. You are extraordinarily gifted, and I hope everybody listening goes and finds your work. And you don't have to be a young adult teen reader to read, as I found, because I enjoyed it in my 40s.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, about half of my readership, at least half of my readership is adult.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good
I mean,
to
my
hear,
books are in
because I
schools and
was
stuff,
worried.
but yeah, no, it's mostly adults.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. It's affirming for a grown man like me who just enjoyed your work.
I don't write for teenagers. Like, I don't purposely write for teenagers, but I do very much write with their families in mind. So they're not going to be crazy, like you're going to find historical groundedness, but you're not going to find any kind of like ideological weirdness in my books. It's very, it's truth-based, and but it's not also like, they're not polemics, they're just stories about regular, real people living in extraordinary times. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate so much about your work. I remember I think it's when What the Night Sings. There's a song that's intricate to the story, Vittoria, Vittoria. That was the first song I heard my wife sing at college when.
Really?
Yeah,
so you know it.
Vittoria, Vittoria, Vittoria. Yeah. And fell in love with her through her music, and so that brought back a lot for me. And
so good.
Your writing is so just stark and spare that for male readers, I find it to be, for me anyway, I find it to be very. You just don't go on and on. You get right to the point. And
thank you for recognizing that. I hate purple prose.
yeah, well, you're great at what you do. I think of you as this is so dorky. I think of you as a mix between like a Madeleine L'Engle meets Cormac McCarthy. That's what I think of when I read your
like that.
Artsy, but spare and to the point kind of a writer. So I hope that's
quite
a compliment.
a combo.
Okay, good. Yeah. I'm a fanboy, and it's showing. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
I hope all of our Maybe God listeners find you and your work, and truly, especially about this issue happening now since October 7th, it's so near to your heart. I hope they go and hear your thoughts through your Instagram post. You'll find it if you're listening now and you're wondering. You'll find it easily, and on her Instagram
Yeah,
page.
just look for my mug on there.
Yeah, it's a
It's the
video.
one like non-illustrated picture on
Right.
it. And I'm going to do more of that. I'm going
I
to
think you should.
exposit more.
Yes, I think you should. Naysayers be darned, like keep going, because what you're saying is the truth and it needs to be said. And you have a particular platform and angle to speak into this conundrum in Israel that I think is worth leveraging. So grateful for you in that regard. I know it takes courage to speak on this particular topic. So keep going, sister.
Can't not.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm sure. We are going to continue holding you in prayer for everything you've got before you. I pray you keep writing and keep speaking and keep healing where this pain is concerned. And we're going to be watching and listening for what's next. And really excited
Thanks so much.
for what God's going to do. All right, Vesper Stamper, thanks for joining us on the Maybe God podcast.
Thanks, Eric.